Everyone's on the Table, a podcast about board games, card games, and tabletop war games.
Hey, it's Chase from On the Table Gaming, and if you've been a long-time listener, you'll remember some of our past conversations with A Song of Ice and Fire legends, folks like Don Shelkey, the original A Song of Ice and Fire U.S. champion, with moves like the Shelkey Shuffle being named after him, and eventually having that to be errated out, as well as folks like Brett Lampfer, an outspoken member of the online community. Well, today we're thrilled to be speaking with the next in these line of storied champions, and we're joined by Luke Hartman, the 2022 U.S. National Champion for A Song of Ice and Fire. Luke, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Chase.
First off, congratulations on your success at Gencon. How does it feel, now being on the other side of the event, maybe a week or so out from it?
Still surreal. I mean, I've been playing these games since, I was 12 years old. I came into Warhammer Fantasy, and it's been 20 years now of playing tabletop miniatures and painting. And I tell you, I've played in a lot of tournaments, but I've never won a large event like this event at Gencon. So this is the first any sort of grand tournament win for me, and it's still a shock. And I tell you, it makes me feel like those 20 years of trying is finally validated. I'll have to find a new goal.
Well, we'll get to that. Some future goals. I'm assuming right now you're talking to me from like an Iron Throne, right? Has the house been remodded at all, or no?
No. So I did manage to snag a banner from the Gen Con event.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's great. My wife hates it. It's massive.
Oh man! All right, I have to dig deeper on that. There.
Mm-hmm.
What's your wife's take been on this? Does she kind of get it, or is it is she into wargaming as well? Or
I tell you, she's known about it for a long time. And when I first met her on our first date, I took her to the trunk of my car, opened it up, and I showed her my miniatures. And I was like, "Look, this is a big part of my life. If this is a no-go for you, let me know now, because this is as much a part of me as my right arm." And she was like, "Wait a minute, I know what this is. This is Warhammer. My brothers actually play this." And I was like, "Oh my God, marry me now." So she's known about this for a long time, and it's just kind of a well, that's my husband's hobby. That's his thing that he does. I never really thought that she cared as much as she did. Is when she told me, when I called her to tell her, that I had won, and I'm just almost out of breath. Really trying to let it sink in. I called her. She said, "Oh yeah, I know. I was wondering when you were going to call me. We've been watching the whole time."
Oh my gosh, that's so wonderful.
I know. And shout out to Stefan Newhouse and Bob from Sunday Slaughter for streaming and commentating and letting me be on stream for 4 games, because I had no idea, but my family back home was watching it, and that means so much to me.
Oh, that is wonderful. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got to love Free Folk Bob. I'm calling him now because
yeah,
we got to move away from Lord Commander here. Well, let's go back a little bit more. So you kind of told us a little bit. You've been wargaming for about 20 years. It sounds like. In addition to playing, we had a Patreon supporter there, Calvin, who was taking pictures of the event, and actually in the days leading up, he sent some pictures of your miniatures. And I was just blown away. I mean, in addition to being just very well painted, you also had some really cool conversions and additional flourishes on your miniatures that really set them apart. Was there any particular unit or miniature in your force whose visuals you were most proud of?
Oh, definitely my Brendan Tully model, which, isn't even in either of my lists, but I brought him along because for that exact reason. He's my favorite model. He's featuring, with an axe kind of cutting down and cutting through the neck of a Lannister guardsman who, as I was making the model, looked a little bit like my friend Carlo from A Song of Ice and Fire stats. So we nicknamed him Carlo, and since Carlo, since he was in town for Gen Con, I had him go ahead and sign the bottom of the base because, it was just perfect. But yeah, I'm definitely not the only one who's doing conversions or who's out there really trying to, showcase to the community what type of creativity you can have with these miniatures. But it was great to be able to put that on display. And, normally going into a tournament, in my back pocket, I'm kind of hoping, well, if I don't do well on the table, maybe I'll come away with the best painted. There was no best painted at Gen Con. So, my ships were burnt. There was only one choice, right? I had to
And that's why you're like, I guess instead I'll just win it now because that's what it took. Oh, all right. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, after seeing your painting skills and you kind of demonstrating your playing skills, I mean, I really have to ask, is there anything you aren't good at? Like there has to be some sort of karmic balance here, right?
Yeah, probably. If you ask my kids, it's my humor. I'm just, oh my gosh, I think I've gone on to full on dad mode these last 10
You got
years.
to
So
wear that badge of pride, sir.
thank
Well,
you.
let's jump in and talk Gen Con. So, had you been to Gen Con before?
Yeah, it's been 3 years. I didn't go through the virtual versions of Gen Con, and last year they announced, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks out, that they were going to do a national tournament. And to be honest, I was not comfortable enough with my Song of Ice and Fire play
Mm-hmm.
to go with kind of a short notice. So I didn't go last year, but I did certainly follow along. And congratulations to Brett. I know it's been over a year, but he's won it, I think, the last 3 times. So going into this year's Gen Con, when I saw Brett, I knew exactly, who he was, and I knew what this level of competition was going to be. And I'm still shocked, Chase, that I came away with it. I mean,
Well, you just got to put that banner in the bedroom, and every morning you wake up, you can look at it and be like, "Oh yeah, all right, it is real. It wasn't a dream."
oh, it's like I gotta have that daily reminder. But it's fantastic, and it kind of comes back to how I got into Song of Ice and Fire. If we want to talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I was introduced to this game from a friend of mine, Brandon McDowell, who went with me to this year's Gen Con. And he kind of showed me the game, not really knowing that I had played tabletop war games before. And when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this reminds me so much of Warhammer Fantasy. We got to try it. And we played the Starks vs. Lannister starter box, and we didn't even know that the rules had changed. So we played with those original rule book that came in the box. This was at the beginning of, let's see, February of 2020. Yes, it's been 18 months. So it was right as the 2021 season update. We get introduced into the game, and they're going through the Visions and the Flames. And actually, the first Song of Ice and Fire content that I ever absorbed was on the table gaming.
I'm so sorry.
No, it was wonderful. So I'm listening to the interviews with Michael and Fabio, and they're going through each week it's a new faction breakdown, and I'm like, oh, this is great. We're gonna get every week the designers of the game are gonna
Oh, geez.
you're gonna give us their take on the game. Little did I know that was a kind of short burst of content that was so much that it got me very, very interested in the game. And so we began with that 2021 update. So as
Okay.
soon as that launched, that was my first introduction to the game.
Now, did you jump in with Starks then?
I did. And
Okay.
all I heard was, "Oh, you missed it. Starks used to be so good." And I was like, "Well, surely they could be, good again." And it took a lot of time to kind of rediscover, I think, what is it that makes Starks different? What is it that they specialize in? What makes them so unique on the table? And I think over time, I finally found that. And it really took this 2021 Season 1 update with the update to Sworn Swords and Honor Guard and Arya, Sansa, all the Stark updates, even mainly the 2 core cards, the Winter's Might and the Northern Ferocity. Those updates, while they seem small in themselves, were very significant to me because what I saw was sort of this small window opening for Starks to have a very, very strong place against the top competitors like Free Folk and Night's Watch and Targaryens and Lannisters. Starks have tools, and if you're able to use those tools on the table, you can kind of survive in a meta that maybe usually leaves Starks in the dust.
Jump into that. What do you see as being sort of the best and worst things about House Stark at this moment?
So one of the best things about House Stark is having access to abilities like Warcry and Hardened that aren't tied to unique attachments, right? Like Free Folk, it's tied to Tormund, it's tied to 1/1. If you want to bring Warcry, for Starks, being able to bring a unit like She-Bears, you're not limited to a unique slot, so you can bring more than one. And I really feel like the 2 units of she-bears is probably a minimum for me going forward in a competitive list. Because what Starks lack from their less expensive units are keywords. They don't have Sundering, they don't have Vicious naturally. They have a lot of crit blow. Crit blow on she-bears, crit blow on swords, crit blow on honor guard. And that critical blow synergizes well with their cards. So you've got Northern Ferocity and Winter's Might that give you Vicious and Sundering. And then you have she-bears who, with Warcry, can put out a vulnerable and a panic token. And now all of a sudden, your crit blow is the perfect tool to take advantage of Sundering Vicious cards and vulnerable and panic tokens. And with an attachment like the Mormont Veteran, who is just incredible value, but even more important in a Stark army where your units are getting better as they go down in ranks. They're actually improving stats. And the Mormont Veteran is another tool that you can use to improve your stats as you go down. So when you're out activated as a Stark player against a Free Folk, if they're going to be the first ones to hit you, that's actually in your benefit, because as you take damage, you're going to get better. The Mormont Veteran is going to help you stick around and then help you leverage those improved stats at your last rank for longer. And actually, the Mormont Veteran can kind of be a gatekeeper, especially against people who like to bring a lot of cheap units, a lot of 4-point units, because they don't have a high attack value. They're going to have a hard time dealing enough hits to actually put damage through the Hardened.
Gotcha, that makes sense. What do you think is like kind of the challenge for playing House Stark right now?
I think the challenge is probably going into some of these matchups where you really start to feel like you're at a disadvantage on the tactics board. Starks don't necessarily have the strongest NCUs, so I think one of the NCUs that you probably should be looking to bring is Peter Baelish. He gives you a tool that you wouldn't otherwise have, and I know he's a great tool for any faction that can take him. You know, if you're not Free Folk, you should be considering Peter Baelish. But specifically for Starks, I think when you run into other factions who can do panic that's not tied to an attack, like Lannisters, they can put you down to that last rank, and then they can make you take panic tests, which is going to ignore that Mormont Veteran. And if they can really spike you with some panic damage, or Free Folk with There's Too Many, that's a way to take out your last rank without even having to do any hits or any damage. I also think in list building that there's probably a few standout commanders, namely Eddard Stark, GreatJon, Brendan Tully as his Outrider commander version. And then all the other commanders are, I think they're just lacking either a unit that they go in well, or their cards are not quite as universally effective as GreatJon, Eddard, and Brendan.
That makes sense. Let's get to talking about the list you brought. But before we jump into that, when you're approaching list building, do you build for scenarios, or do you look for key combinations or specific, offensive dice thresholds you want to try and cross? How do you build out when you're sitting down to think about list building?
Oh, that's a great question, Chase. So the way I do it is I look at every faction that I'm going to be facing against, including Starks. And regardless of scenario, I know if I have at least 5 combat units on the table from my list, I can adjust how I play on the table to match the scenario. Where I would get concerned is in list building, if I'm only ending up with 4 combat units, you just kind of end up with this numbers discrepancy with Starks that you can't really overcome. So I think 5 combat units is a minimum, and that seems to be where the Starks thrive, is in that 5 combat unit list. So with both of my lists bringing 5 combat units, I designed the list to face different opponents, and I look at what's doing well, what lists are performing well for each faction, and I think, okay, what list am I going to play into that? So for my Eddard Stark list, which is Eddard Stark Commander in Honor Guard, a unit of Tully Cavaliers with a Glory Seeker, a unit of Flayed Men with a Glory Seeker, a unit of Stormcrow Mercenaries with Rickon and Asha, and Shaggy Dog. And that combination of Stormcrow Mercenaries with Rickon Asha and Shaggy Dog, that's an 8-point package for 2 activations. And that's about as cheap as Starks can get for activations. We don't have any natural 4-point units to select from. So in order to increase your activation count, if you're going to bring expensive cavalry units, you can leverage Stormcrow Mercenaries' rule of adaptive to bring Rickon for free, who then brings Asha for free, and Rickon enables you to bring Shaggy Dog for 3 points. So that's your 8-point 2 activation package. And then I have Peter Baelish and I have Catelyn Stark as my 2 NCUs. And I love having Peter in both of my lists, but I love him especially in a 2 NCU list, because when you have 2 NCUs, you are saying to your opponent that there's always going to be the 5th tactic zone basically available to them if they have a 3rd NCU.
Mm-hmm.
And what Peter allows you to do, Peter allows you to, block one zone and obviously use the benefit of another. But it becomes even more important to do that when you're only bringing 2 NCUs, because you're not going to be able to cover enough zones in time to stop your opponent from doing what they want to do, or more importantly, stop them from holding on to that last NCU and playing it on a zone at the end of the round to play something like a surprise, assault orders or we do not so. So my list for Eddard is designed to go into Lannisters, because Eddard gives a lot of morale resistance. His unit itself has Iron Resolve, and the Tully Cavaliers give Embolden, so +1 to morale. And then Rickon in the Stormcrow Mercenaries also improves their morale. And with Eddard's card, Northern Defiance, you can auto-pass a panic test within short range. So that really benefits playing against a morale army like Lannisters, who are going to hit you with a lot of panic tests. And a lot of Lannister units that you see at competitive play are like crossbows. They bring flayed men. They bring Knights of Casterly Rock. So having cavalry to match their cavalry and cavalry to chase down their crossbowmen is also advantageous.
That makes sense.
And
that's a great explanation of your 2 NCUs there.
And that's the way I have found that to be most effective. I tried Sansa to recur Eddard's cards, but for 2 NCUs, it's very difficult. It seems like whatever zone you're replacing with Sansa is unless it's Crown, it's probably not as good as the card you're grabbing back. Because if you're covering, let's say the maneuver zone to go and grab Swift Reposition, well, you could have just had a normal maneuver. Yeah. So I don't like Sansa in that spot, and Arya was a consideration, but Arya doesn't have the added benefit of blocking a zone like Peter does.
Right.
And she can only really benefit Eddard's unit and the Stormcrows, because the 2 Cav and Shaggy can't use Arya tokens. So I settled on Catelyn and Peter for that list. And another opponent I play that list into is Baratheons, especially if they're bringing Melisandre and Jaqen, because they're going to be doing, unlimited range panic tests across the board. And so you're going to want that auto pass card from Eddard. You're going to want to have, the Emboldened from the Tully Cav to try and not roll those casino dice and take panic damage on the way in. But what I really like that Eddard does is once you get in to the Baratheon units, you've got 3 units that have Rally Cry. So Eddard for his attachment, and then the 2 Cav units with their Glory Seekers. So they're spreading out healing back to each other. So as you're taking panic damage on the way in, when you finally get there, hopefully you've mitigated some of that damage, and then you get there and you can heal it back up through attacking.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And then I'd like to play that list into Targaryens, especially if they're running Drogo, because it's got 2 Cav units that you can really try and shove into Drogo's unit and not worry so much about Expert Duelist. Mm-hmm. So while he may be able to do the 1 wound, he's not able to execute your attachments. And then you can have Eddard somewhere else on the other sid of the board, doing Eddard things with his Honor Guard and his Fury for the Fallen card. But I love playing that list versus the GreatJon list, which is all infantry with very important attachments like Mormont veterans and GreatJon himself.
So you can just know if there's an expert duelist list you're going up against.
Play the Cav list. Yep. Absolutely. And being able to have a list that plays into those types is great. And the last matchup I play Eddard into is Greyjoys. So with Greyjoys, they have their pillage mechanic, but it's dependent on destroying enemy ranks. And so when you're bringing 3 units with a 3+ armor save, you don't have to worry so much about their archers. They're going to have a hard time getting damage through. And when you finally get into combat with them, if you're using your cavalry units, they're going to have a hard time generating pillage tokens, because it's going to have to take 6 wounds to take a rank off. And with the rally cries and you're healing it back up, they're going to get frustrated that they're not generating pillage like they normally would against infantry units.
So you got yourself covered against, 4 factions, or, specific styles of lists in 4 factions. That's a pretty, actually, that's a pretty good base there.
Yeah, and so the opposite side of that spectrum is the GreatJon list, which is House Bolton Cutthroats with GreatJon, She-Bears with Rickon and Asha, Shaggy Dog, another unit of She-Bears with a Mormont veteran, and then Starksworn Swords with a Mormont veteran. And then for NCUs, I've got Catelyn, Peter, and Arya.
Okay, so that's the one you're bumping up to 3.
Yes. And it works very well to play that list at 8 activations because of the opponents that list plays into. That list is mainly designed to go into free folk. So I'd rather be at 8 activations to start than 7 activations against free folk. What I find works so well against free folk is the 2 units with the Mormont veterans, the She-Bears and the Sworn Swords. Those are they're like my anchors. I mean, they are my bulwark. They are the units that I can put on a flank and know they are not going to crumble easily, right? They're going to take chariot charges. They're going to take they can stand up to, multiple raider units with raid leaders. They can handle thins. They can handle just about anything and stay and last, even when I'm out activated. So I find that when I brought units that didn't have the Mormont veterans or different lists or even cavalry lists, I really struggled being out activated because the free folk players could maneuver around. They had more units, more activations. They get into my flanks. They could double, triple up on me, hit me with that there's too many. But when I'm running the Mormont veterans, what I found was these, the death by 1,000 cuts doesn't work so well when you've got auto blocks as you're going down in ranks. And so, the attacks on, hitting on 4s from raiders, it's not uncommon that they don't do any damage at all because the Mormont veteran and the hardened is blocking so many, and the She-Bears and the Sworn Swords have a 4-up save naturally. And so it works really well. And then of course GreatJon's cards also do a great job of helping you get damage when it's not your turn. So his cards Lash Out and Last Stand. Lash Out dealing 2 wounds to the defender for each of your destroyed ranks, which, by the way, if you have a unit with a Mormont veteran on its last rank, if they attack you and do no damage, you can still play Lash Out and deal 4 wounds back to them just for their trouble.
Just to spite them.
Right. And then Last Stand. Last Stand is a great card, and it actually has a crazy interaction with Shaggy Dog, because Shaggy Dog, when he dies in melee, he can play Last Stand and attack back, and he actually counts as having all of his wounds gone. So Shaggy Dog, I've had Shaggy Dog attack with 8 attacks that are sundering and vicious.
Jeez.
And he just wastes a unit on his way out. And then, probably the thing that's most special about this list for me is the House Bolton Cutthroats with GreatJon. He is my little mini missile, right? His unit never survives a game. And they're not meant to. I've tried him in a couple of different units. I've tried him in Sworn Swords. I've tried him in She-Bears and in Karstark Loyalists. And no matter what unit you put him in, it just seems like they don't last the game. He's just so aggressive. He does wounds to his own unit to get his auto 6 charge. So when I finally, came around to the idea that he's not going to live and it's okay, that's when I got the most out of GreatJon. Because then I said, okay, if he's not going to survive the game, how can I get the most out of him? I need to put him in the cheapest unit that's just an absolute aggressor, has all the aggressive stats that you can get for as cheap a price tag. And the answer to that for me was the House Bolton Cutthroats. For 5 points, you get a 5 move, hit on 3, great attack profile of 764. So even at their second rank, there's still 6 attacks. They only have a 5-up armor and a 7-up morale, but they come with Vicious. And the ability that when you're attacking enemies who haven't activated this round, you can reroll attack dice and the defender becomes vulnerable. And those are very, very key abilities for kind of unlocking GreatJon's potential. Because when you combine that with something like an Aria token to maneuver 5 inches and get in position for a charge the next round. So you maybe it's the end of round 1, you can start measuring out some distance and you find, hey, if I use an Aria token and I maneuver up, I can start the round as the first player and I'm going to be 11 inches away from this key target unit. I'm going to do that. I'm going to use Aria and one of her tokens aggressively. And that's actually what I did against Carlo. I used Arya's token, I maneuvered up 5, and then I started the next round as the first player. And as that first player, my first action was to activate GreatJon's unit, to use his Order Reckless Heroism to get an auto 6 charge. And that auto 6 is important too. People forget that if you roll a 1, it's not just that you lose your rerolls, but you can't play cards.
Yeah.
And you really want to play cards when you're playing with GreatJon. So getting that auto 6, going 11 inches in and attacking, you're hitting them on 3s with 7 dice and Vicious with a reroll guaranteed because of their ability. So you can go through hindering terrain, which normally takes away your charge reroll, but you still get it because you're getting a reroll from an ability. So then you're going in with your reroll guaranteed. You're dropping a vulnerable token. If you do your attack dice and you play Berserker Tactics, you can take 3 wounds to deal an additional 4 wounds, and you drop a panic token because you are now a House Umber unit because of GreatJon's attachment.
Good Lord.
You've just done your own war cry by yourself because Cutthroats drop the vulnerable, the card drops the panic. And they've taken 4 wounds already, so you got 8 wounds to go between your 7 dice on 3s rerolling, vulnerable token, and then your Vicious panic test with a panic token.
Jeez.
So GreatJon's unit one-shotted Carlo's Cutthroats with Grey Worm.
And they still got overrun. You can keep the party going.
Yeah, you keep the party going. So then GreatJon he did overrun. He went into Jorah, and he took out Jorah.
Oh no!
It was a 2-for-1. But going into like how am I gonna beat Free Folk? What in Free Folk am I scared of? What hurts me as a Stark player from Free Folk? And the answer is Giants, Mag, and Chariots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at which my commanders is going to give me the ability to take out Giants, Mag, and Chariots. And the answer is GreatJon.
Yeah, this is the list that's scared of me. Yeah.
Right.
Oh my god.
So even a Chariot coming in and hitting me hard, well, I could turn around and hit Lash Out. I could turn around and use Last Stand. I could charge Shaggy Dog in a little tight window with his solo base, get to a Chariot and use Berserker Tactics, put 3 wounds on Shaggy and deal 4 wounds to the Chariot. And then you have 2 wounds left to go between Shaggy's 4 attacks with Sundering.
Oh man,
it's great. This has all the tools to deal with what I thought was kind of the boogeyman, the man's
yeah.
And so what it also plays well into is Starks.
Yeah, okay, that's what I wanted to ask you about because I don't know what it is about my brain, but I oftentimes overlook the mirror match, and then it's until I got my Raiders in my Mance bubble fighting another Mance in their Mance bubble, and like nothing's happening. And I'm like, I really should be thinking of like, okay, how do I deal with the mirror match? So what are you anticipating as the Stark opponent here? What are the threats you're worried about, and how is this list going to be taking advantage of any weaknesses there?
Oh, so exactly. So the things you got to worry about are the strengths that I just talked about. Like you got to worry about Mormont veterans. How are you going to get through Hardened? You got to worry about Tully Cavaliers are a great example of like a unit that a lot of Stark players use and have good success with. But they're a unit that I think if you know how you're playing with terrain, if you know when to put out tokens, and if you have units like other units with Mormont veterans, right, like She-Bears and Sworn Swords, I think you're seeing the key here. Mormont veterans are amazing,
and that's what's keeping you in the game. But it's coming down to the commander. That's with the tactics cards that are going to be able to capitalize on those other weaknesses.
Exactly. So the Tully Cavaliers come in and boom, they hit you for a big chunk. Maybe they do two ranks worth of damage on your, your units with your Mormont veteran that you cleverly deployed in front of the Tully Cav and kind of served up for dinner. But they take two wounds off or two ranks off, and then boom, you're gonna hit them with a card like Lash Out, and then you're gonna say thank you for improving my units. I now, I now hit on twos, and I'm gonna war cry on you, and you're stuck in, and I'm right where I want to be. I think in the Stark matchup, you'd rather be the side with the infantry units and hardened than be the Stark side with cavalry units. Because if Starks do one thing well, it's taking a charge, getting knocked down, and getting better, right? And so cavalry is kind of helping the opponent do what they want to do. And then GreatJon's cards again, because they're auto wound cards, they help me as the Stark player punch through the opponent Stark player's hardened abilities.
Makes sense. So, I've always wanted to play House Stark, but when I first got my starter set, my buddy Josh really wanted to go heavy into them. So I started with a little bit of Lannisters. I've still slowly built up a collection, but I mostly played them in demo games. If myself or someone was looking to get started with House Stark and they wanted to jump in, would you say that the Mormont She-Bears are kind of like a must buy that you definitely want to have in your collection then? Because that hardened is just so versatile in matching with the faction weakness.
Definitely they are to every Stark player I talk to, they're my number one recommendation right after get the hero box that you want, the one that has the heroes that you like, the commanders that you're a fan of, and then for your first unit box purchase, get She-Bears, get House Mormont She-Bears, because they come with the attachment that you want, and they come with the infantry unit that you really want. Because I think at the 6-point range for Starks, there's a lot of different ways you could go. There's Bowmen, there's Berserkers, there's Tully Shields, there's, oh gosh, I know I'm missing a couple because there's a few. There's Karstark Spearmen. But I think what the She-Bears do is kind of what we talked about earlier, which is they give you that war cry, which really enables all your other units. If you think of that war cry as almost like a long-range support ability rather than just a personal unit buff, you can have She-Bears sitting on an objective somewhere with nobody to fight, but being able to war cry at long range and put a panicked and vulnerable token out for your Tully Cavaliers to go then charge that unit, you just can't beat it. It's almost like being able to sling out Sundering and Vicious anywhere you want. Except it's not Sundering and Vicious, so you can still use your cards to give you Sundering or Vicious. It's great, and they just fulfill so many roles. They're so versatile when it comes to how can I build a take on all comers list. They're good against free folk because you got crit blow, and you're going to be throwing a lot of dice, and you might get some sixes and do a whole bunch of damage. Panicked and Vulnerable is good against anybody. It's good against people with bad armor. It's good against people with good armor. Anytime you have insurance on your opponent's dice to say, look, nothing funny is going to happen today. You might roll 10 sixes on your first roll, but I'm going to make you roll it again. That always seems to work out. And a lot of people, because I run 2 units of She-Bears, they tell me that the 2 war cries, you really start to feel
it's oppressive.
The token pressure, right? That like when you're looking down at your units and they're all covered in yellow and orange, it's not a good feeling. And those are, I think, kind of the mind games that you can play with the She-Bears. Not to mention that there's some hidden mission cards in Dark Wings, Dark Words, and Winds of Winter. The mission cards to have 2 condition tokens on opponent's units. You can score 2 VPs from that card if you have 2 opponent units with 2 condition tokens on them. And with 2 units of She-Bears, you can really just pump out the tokens. And Starks still have access to the Devastating Impact card, which puts out its own Panicked and Vulnerable token. I feel like the token play from the She-Bears combined with Hardened, which is, guaranteed rolls on your armor save, basically, is how I look at it. Because if you're blocking 3 dice or 3 attacks at your last rank, and let's say you needed 6s to save, maybe they had Sundering and they hit you in the flank, Well, it's almost like rolling 3 guaranteed 6s.
Yeah. And that's
Um,
like, as a free folk player going into that, that's always a
yeah,
nightmare. You're like, I
yeah.
hit, and how many do you block? Okay.
Yeah. And there's even a few times where someone says, okay, I did 2 hits, and I say, well, I'm actually blocking 2, at a minimum, so there's no dice roll. And it's a
Oh,
great feeling for the start
yeah.
player, but those are probably the tools that you need to leverage how your units are designed, right? They're
Hmm.
designed to kind of be inefficient at full health, but more efficient than they normally would be for their points cost at their final rank.
Was there any list that you paired off against at Gen Con that you were surprised by or felt like maybe exposed some weaknesses in your lists?
Absolutely. Um, in particular, my one loss. So I played 9 games, and I lost the one to last year's champion Brett Lampert. I think what he exposed for me in my Edard list was that I was normally playing Edard into Night's Watch
Hmm.
because I liked having the maneuverability. I liked having the cav units to be able to kind of go in and hit something hard. But what I noticed was against John Commander in particular, a knight unit may be able to go in and hit something hard, maybe do like, 8 wounds. But John and Eamon and Night's Watch in general have the ability to recover from that very well. The other problem I realized I had from that Edard list was I didn't have the token play. I didn't
Hmm.
have the she bears, right?
It's almost like they're
So
playing that same game back at you, and they're
right. And
yeah.
I didn't have, I guess what you'd call like insurance on
Hmm.
my charges. So if I just charge Tully Cavaliers in, I'm really kind of at the mercy of his dice. And without, I guess maybe I'm spoiled myself a little bit with the 2 war cries, but I'm so used to having those rerolls that when I didn't have them against Night's Watch, it was very noticeable that the Starks don't really have a lot of tools, especially Eddard and his Honor Guard. If the only keyword they have is crit blow, you're really just fishing for 6s because
Hmm.
you don't have Sundering or Vicious, and it's hard to put damage through. So if Eddard's unit's attacking, Flayed Men in the front, Flayed Men have a 3-up save, and without any sort of token play, they're probably just going to block 66%
Right.
of the attacks that I make. I realized playing against Brett that what would be better in that Night's Watch matchup would have actually been GreatJon because of all the things that we've talked about all the token play and the guarantees and the blocks from the Mormont veterans, specifically to GreatJon's cards. Had I been able to use cards like Lash Out and Last Stand and do damage on Brett's turn, I would have then been able to respond on my turn before he has a chance to heal. So before he can go aiming on the bags and, heal up significant amount of wounds, whatever damage I did to him on his turn, I could probably finish the unit off on my turn. And that was something I wasn't getting from the Edart list that I think I could have gotten from the GreatJon list.
Have you talked to Brett at all about maybe doing a game where you switch up the lists?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if we're avoiding each other right now because to say that we've become friends since Gen Con is an understatement. I talk to the guy every day. He's great. And I think we realized that we're very similar people. We had a lot in common. We're both family guys. We both have kids. We both played Warhammer Fantasy, and our armies were Lizardmen. That was our first love that ever got us into this game. And we have a lot of just different things that we have found in common like over the last couple of weeks. And man, I feel like I talked to him so much lately. So I'm sure we will be playing some games in the future, and I'm sure he'll give me a chance to maybe see, what if
Yeah.
had I played a different list. But I tell you, I don't think the list alone would have done it because he's a fantastic player, and
Yeah.
I fully expected to see him in the final because he was on the other side of the bracket. If I made it that far, I thought surely he'd be there. I was shocked and little pleasantly, pleased
Yeah.
that he was knocked out before then. But no, that would have been great to have gotten that rematch. But I'd be a fool to say that I feel confident in the rematch.
Well, and there are a lot of things that go into tournaments as well. And for
Mhm.
people that haven't played in a tournament, what are some of the non-game things that you have to deal with in a tournament?
What a
Like, what
great
is?
question. Like, let me tell you, Chase, because I actually think more than my lists, more than my preparation, my my approach to tournaments is actually what gave me an advantage if I had one at all. So my buddy Brandon, who I mentioned earlier, he's very much into this theory of like studying chess masters
Hmm.
and what are their habits? What do they do? You know, what do they do on tournament days? How do they, because it's like a marathon, you know, how do they
Yeah.
endure? How do they keep their mind sharp when you have to play hours and hours and hours of a stressful, you know, mental game? And we studied and looked at some of those tips and tricks, and you know it's pretty simple stuff. Get plenty of sleep, drink water, don't eat a large lunch because your body has to take mental energy to
Good.
process that food.
Oh, so you're
Um,
getting down to the you get like
oh, I
moderate
know.
sugar levels. What was
I,
that? There was like a study I saw. Like I don't know if it's actually real. So disclaimer here. It was like chess.com or something. It was that like grandmasters spend like 6,000 calories a day while playing in a tournament or something.
it's true.
So you got the diet, the sleep, the hydration.
Yes, and specifically, so like for lunch, I didn't eat. I didn't go out. I didn't get a big burger. I didn't get something heavy. You know, like people say like during work they get a big lunch and they go to work and they're like, oh, I feel sleepy. You feel tired, and it's
Yeah.
because your body is devoting energy to processing that food. And so we bought large bags of like almonds and pistachios.
Oh man, you're really going. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not even joking because when you think about it, we over 32 hours I played 9 games of A Song of Ice and Fire and they were, you know, 2 hours each. So you're talking 18 hours. I think I messed up on the sleep part. I did not sleep well the night before the last day, but you know, nobody else did either. We got out late and then we went to dinner and we got out of dinner pretty late, so it was like a 6-hour sleep before turning right around and you know, being back in the convention hall. But no, all that preparation, like that's real. And Carlo even was even talking about it, you know, that like it kind of felt like an endurance sport. And I tell you, I felt great. I felt sharp. I felt like I wasn't tired. And I actually felt like every game I learned a little something more and I took that with me into the next game. And
Mm.
I felt like I was getting sharper as others were getting almost duller.
So you're kind of like
Um,
find like a flow state in your games, maybe if we put it in like some terms like that.
yeah, it feels it's hard to describe. Like
Yeah.
it really did feel like the things I did for my body enabled me to be in the right mental state to make very few mental errors. And I tell
Hmm.
you, Chase, at the high level of play, these people are so good at this game. I mean, they are fantastic. And when you're playing people who are this good, it really comes down to not who makes the most right decisions. It comes down to who makes the most mistakes. And oftentimes, it's just one or two mistakes that can cost you a game. Carlo mentioned in his game, he had swift reposition in his hand. That charge that I did with GreatJon to get into Grey Worm's unit of cutthroats, he had the card and he could have backed himself out of range.
Oh,
But it's that fatigue that starts to wear on you. You forget you have options. You forget to make plays. And I made a bad play against Brett. I positioned Shaggy Dog by some stakes. So the next turn he could attack it and kill the stakes. I didn't need to do that. I had a free maneuver before I even make an attack. I could have been
mm,
6 inches further away from the stakes because I was so far up. He was able to
yep.
bounce his Ranger Hunters from a charge to a retreat, retreated sideways towards Shaggy Dog, shifted 2 inches, was in the perfect range to do a short range shot and kill Shaggy. And that was just a mistake on my part. But it's those little mistakes that at this high level of play cost you the game. So I feel like any advantage you can give yourself, taking care of yourself, you know, take vitamins, bring
Yeah.
ibuprofen with you. People laugh at me. I bring breath mints, ibuprofen, and deodorant to tournaments
Hey,
because
and everyone would like to thank you for.
yeah. I tell him, look, it's not for me, it's for you.
That's
It's
a
for you.
generosity. That's amazing. I
It's
don't
for
want
your
to shoot any
benefit.
things out there, but I've definitely been around some people that I would appreciate if they took the diligence you did. So,
Thank you. See, I've done enough of these tournaments to know that, like, I come away with a headache, bad breath, and stinky armpits, and I try to be better than that.
and it's like, obviously you're a fan of the game, right? You can tell just by talking about championship aside, it's a game that you enjoy. It's clear that you enjoy thinking about it. Having won and now having a little bit of time go by, do you feel like, winning a national championship for this game, do you feel like that's changed your relationship with the game in any way?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it has, and I did not expect it to. I thought I'd come away from Gen Con after 18 months of painting an army and preparing for a large event, that I'd come away burnout. I'd just want a break from the game. What I found was on my 6-hour drive home, I did nothing but talk about this game. And ever since then, I think it has actually renewed my love for the game, renewed my interest in being a part of the community, not just a spectator, not just a fly on the wall, but actively involved. And maybe it was the tournament and the results that has given me or made me feel like I have a platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It feels like now I can share, with more people how much I love this game. And people who have tried to get into this game over the last 18 months, I've talked to them, I've showed them stuff, and they have been, moderately interested. They said, okay, yeah, oh yeah, that's neat, that's your thing. After the results from Gen Con, I've had so many people reach out to me and say things like, so are Renly Baratheons any good? I'm thinking of ordering these High Garden pikemen. It's like, wait, where have you been? What has made you so interested in this game? And they went and watched the stream. They actually watched the game being played because they knew me. They knew
Yeah.
someone, on the screen playing. And now I have 3 or 4 friends who, I did, I had kind of given up on their interest in the game. Now they want to play. Now they want to be a part of it. And it's great. I'm not, I'm never going to be a person who's going to say like, "Oh, I told you so." I'm thrilled to death. I'm like, "Please, please come play," because this game is only as fun as the people we have to play it with.
Yes. And I think, and kudos to you and Brett. And I think even talking to you before the podcast a little bit, you are both examples of being a role model. And I'm really excited that you got like the Brett bug now, right? Where you win a national event. And now you're like, you got to keep going more. And I think that's so important. That's how the game grows. And so I'm really excited. The more people that get into the game, the more fun it is. Here's a question. So if you you get some new people coming in, you're going to sit down to play some, casual games, people are learning their game, you're maybe not going to bust out your Gen Con list against them for their first game. What might be a start commander you would play into somebody that you maybe feel isn't necessarily a super competitive commander, but one that you just think is really fun that you don't maybe get to play enough of?
So I actually just this week asked myself that very same question, and the commander I settled on was Rob Stark.
Okay.
He's a commander from the starter box. He's a commander that is a character from the show that people know and love, and he's got very, I would say, very player friendly cards. You hear that term negative play experience. I think playing against Rob is always a positive play experience because he never really does anything that makes you say, "Oh, I can't believe he could do that." He just kind of, he has some retreat cards that are,
He's not saying nope. Like, I want to do this thing. No,
right.
sorry, you can't do that. Like,
You
what?
can't have fun. No, Rob lets you play with all your toys, and I think he's great to demonstrate that game and to kind of handicap myself. But I tell you, Chase, what I like to do with tabletop games, I prefer to find two, if they're available, two brand new players who are new to the game and let them play each other, because it doesn't matter how much I or Brett or anybody who's played this game for a long time. It doesn't matter how much you handicap yourself on the list. There are just concepts about this game that you understand that they don't.
Right.
Positioning, flank charges, rear charges, how ranged attacks work, how to block charge angles, and especially the tactics board. I find that's one thing that the new players kind of struggle to prioritize. They see these models over here with swords and arrows, and they want to go fight stuff, but then it's like, well, hang on, the tactics board is actually this really, really valuable resource you probably want to take for yourself and keep from your opponent. But when you have two brand new people, same sort of skill level, that's the best. That's the best way to teach somebody, and that's how I like to teach. And you asked, what do I see myself doing now that I won Gen Con? For the last couple of weeks, I kind of felt like, wow, my goals were go play at Gen Con and take a fully painted Stark Army on a display board. And I did that. It kind of feels like, well, what am I going to chase now? What goal am I going to put out in front of myself that's going to motivate me, to strive for excellence again? And for me, it's community building. Right now, like my whole mindset is switched over. I used to think, well, I'll never TO a tournament because then I can't play. Now I feel like, well, what's a local tournament, to me after coming away from Gen Con? I want to community build. I want to run tournaments. I want to put on campaigns. I want to put on that hat and community build for a while. And for myself, I never thought I'd play another faction other than Starks. And now that what I consider all of my Stark units that I play with on the table to be painted complete, I started to get that itch again for what's the next project. People ask me what was my favorite tournament, and I tell them the next one, and they ask what's your favorite unit you've ever painted, and I say, well, it's the next one. Like, it's always going to be a continuous striving for excellence and pushing myself. And I don't paint for competition. I don't paint for praise. I paint because I get a vision in my head of what I think something should look like. And I just challenge myself, can I bring that into reality? Can I make this model look the way I imagine it?
Man. Well, I'm excited to see where things go. Kind of last thing here as we start to wrap things up. So I've always really enjoyed like sports that could be looked at as like individual sports, but they're nested within a team sport. So maybe kind of a giving example, like you have your gaming group and your group of friends that you play with. That's where you like hone your craft. But when you go out and you play in a tournament, you're competing as an individual, right? But even though you're sort of standing on the shoulders of your training partners, is there anyone back home in your gaming group that you want to give a shout out to for helping you sharpen your skills to your games? And are there like any like Sith apprentice in the wings that we need to be watching out for?
Oh man! So I guess so. First, I'll say my Rocket City Golden Company boys back home. They obviously our phrase is iron sharpens iron, and we really kind of go hard and competitive against each other. And I think it takes a good group of people who have that same mindset, that same desire to play the game at that level, and probably at that intensity, and to not take wins or losses personally. And when you have a group of people like that, you can really elevate your game very quickly because they're getting better as you're getting better. And so my guys back home, Brandon McDowell, John Reinhardt, Daniel Bayer is our friend.
Those are your boys. Those are all names I know. Oh man!
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right, you got a crew there. Oh.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. And of course we want to grow. And I've talked to the guys. Hey boys, like we might have to cool it down a little bit. When we get new players in, we don't want to steamroll them. We don't want to scare them off. We want to build them up. But that foundation is going to take some time. And yeah, I'll give a shout out again to my you said the Sith waiting in the wings. So my daughter's turned 11, and
oh boy, here we go.
I have I'm realistic about it. I know for young girls, this is not the most appealing thing in the world, but she has started to show interest, and
future she-bear you got right.
Yeah, it'd be great.
Fantastic. We got to get like a kids tournament going or something, like a young teens. Man. Well, that's fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on here. And we look forward to your future community building and tournament hosting and future tournament play. We'll be watching that with great interest.
Thanks. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for having me on, Chase.
All right. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed. And in the meantime, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.